my name is Loretta Hayes, and I am from Hayes Sewing Machine Company. And today, we're going to do a little different, little twist on our creative videos. So about a month ago, I did a video on taming your stash. Because I was sharing that one of the things that I wanted to do for my 2024 goals is I would like to tame my stash. Not trying to get rid of the stash, just trying to get rid of those pieces of fabric where it's too big to throw away, but not really big enough to do an entire quilt with. And so that previous video, I did 5-inch block patterns to tame the stash. And so we will link that video below so that if you want to see that, you can check that out. So what I did this time, just to switch it up a little bit, is I did some Villa Rosa patterns that are using 2.5-inch strips. So essentially jelly rolls. So if you have some jelly roll bundles that you've wanted to use, these patterns would be excellent for that. So in that first video, I shared with everyone that green is my favorite color. And so when I started for these 3 quilts, I started in my green section. So even though I had done 4 quilts with 5-inch squares out of my greens, I still had lots of greens that I could do. And what's nice is with the 2.5-inch strips, really all you need is 2.5 inch, you know. So you know, if you have that like 1/8 of a yard left over from a pattern, you can knock out a couple of strips quite often. So the first pattern that we're going to do today is called Cherrydale. And Cherrydale is a 2.5-inch strip. You need, if we're doing it the size of the pattern, we need 39 2.5-inch strips. And then we need fabric for the square. So this is Cherrydale here. So we need 39 strips, and then we need fabric for the square, and we need 1 yard of fabric for the square. So it was not a problem. I had already pulled out my green fabric, so I cut a bunch of green strips. And so super simple. You sew 3 of them together, and you're cutting them in different lengths. So some of them are longer lengths and some of them are shorter lengths. But it was a lot of fun. Just like with the 5-inch squares, I love all kinds of green fabrics. So I had some kind of lime greenish ones, and I kind of put those at the top and the bottom of the quilt. Kind of worked my spring greens, and then kind of went into my blue greens on the quilt. So yes, a little bit of organization, but not much on there. Basically sewed the strips together, cut the blocks, and then wiggled them around. And so once I had that done, I needed to have something for my squares. And so I could have done a navy blue, I could have done, say, a cream color, but I just kind of wanted to do a pop. And so if you look at a color wheel, if you look directly across the color wheel from green, you will find reds, and then of course pinks and kind of purples are going to be on that same side right next to the reds. So I originally looked at it with reds, and I'm like, oh, too stark, too stark a contrast. And so I went ahead and I put the kind of hot pink square up against it, and I'm like, ooh, I like that. That looks good. So the problem was I didn't have a yard. So I started out, this was my first one. I probably had about a half yard, maybe a little bit more. But I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get all of my squares out of that. And so I raided the pink stash again. And I have a shocking little amount of pink in my stash. Like I'm going to have to build that part of it up as opposed to taming it. And so I found a pink that was a little lighter, so I did those squares on the outside. And I still didn't have enough squares, so I shot in there and I found some purple to create that. on there. Super, super fun quilt to do. Literally pieced it in like a matter of 2 nights. First night putting the strips together, chopping them up, and then second doing the actual layout of the quilt and cutting, sewing them together. But totally a totally fun one to do. Just has a green backing to it and a green binding, all of which came out of my stash. Woohoo! Stash doesn't look like anything has happened to it.
It fluffs up.
I'm working on the theory that like you take the weight off of it and then the rest of the fabric relaxes and rises up a little bit. But so this is the 6th of the green quilts. So 5 were originally for the 5-inch squares, and actually maybe 4 was and then this is the 5th one. All right, so that is Cherrydale. It is a Villa Rosa pattern. So Villa Rosa patterns are on a postcard. If you can print the cutting directions and the piecing directions on the back of a postcard, it's going to be easy to do. All right, so I did that quilt, and I finally said, unbelievably, I'm done with green for a while. I'm like, I want to work with something else. So I looked in my stash and I said, okay, well, what else do I have in my stash that I have a good amount of? And I surprisingly had brown. And Pam actually mentioned this to me. She goes, I can't believe that you are doing a brown quilt because I don't usually quilt in brown. So this quilt here, how about I hold it up, Pam? This is a super fun quilt. This is, if the first quilt was quick to piece, this one literally was an evening.
Very nice.
Okay. This is mazed.
No. Well, that's appropriate.
So mazed requires 42.5-inch strips. And so what I did is I rated my kind of browns and creams. I did lighter value, so kind of creams, taupes, a little bit of kind of a peachy, but very neutral and very light. I selected some of those, and then I selected some browns and rusts and dark browns and kind of some, I don't know, what is that color? Pinky?
It's a brick color.
A brick color. There you go. And so what's super cool is 1 light strip, 1 dark strip makes 1 block.
Oh, that's cool.
On there. So literally I needed 40. I needed 20 strips of the darker color, and I need 20 strips of the lighter color. And so sew it together, cut the strips according to the pattern, and 1 strip made 1 block. So super, super easy. This particular quilt has 20 blocks in it, but this was so fun that I thought, oh, this would be a great quilt if you wanted to go big. Like you wanted to do a bed quilt and you wanted to have kind of a nice overall, color range, I thought that was fabulous. So even though I don't typically do brown in my piecing, and yet I have brown in my stash, so obviously I have done at some point, it was a really fun one, and there wasn't a lot of color coordination to do. I just made the blocks, laid them out on the floor, just went ahead and took a look at them. The only thing that I do when I'm laying out blocks, particularly if I'm doing scrap type work, is I'll lay them out and then I'll take a picture of them with my phone. And so when you take a picture with your phone, it like puts you maybe visually 10 feet back from your project. And oftentimes I will look at my my phone picture and I'll go, ooh, I need to flip those 2 blocks. Where I'm looking at it visually on the floor and I don't see that. Okay. So it's a nice thing to take a picture on your phone to kind of check things out. I also find that when I do that, I often find when I am doing laying out the blocks, if I've mislaid a block, I see it in the picture
Yeah.
as opposed to seeing it on the floor. So that is mazed. 40 strips, 20 dark, 20 light. And that does your quilt. So super, super cool. So I cut a bunch of brown squares. Strips. We're working on shapes next time.
week. There you go.
So I cut a bunch of brown strips, and so I did not use them all in the mazed quilt. And so I'm like, oh, cool. I'll just make another quilt with it. And so this one is Cathedral. And so Cathedral, it needs 40 strips again. Their directions are, for the strips, you need 2.5 strips of each of 20 fabrics. I'm like, so my math says that's 40 strips. But you do need to have 2 strips of each color on there. And so I laid it out. I looked at the picture on this one, and I'm like, ooh, I kind of like the contrast that the author used of doing kind of a blue in the center. And once again, for the background, for the centers, you need like 3/4 of a yard. And so I didn't have 3/4 of a yard of what I wanted. And so what I did is I picked like 3 or 4. So all in the kind of teal, green, blue, turquoisey colors.
Very
on
nice.
there. So just, just adapt the pattern to what you'd like. Now, I had sewn together a good number of blocks and kind of laid them out. I probably had maybe 10 to 15 blocks done. And I put it down, and it looked really, really brown, like boringly brown. And so kind of have to change horses midstream when that happens. You lay it out and you're like, don't like it. So what I did is I went back and I started rating my stash with some other colors. So I added some kind of rust, there's some reds, some golds, even put a little bit of orange in it. I'm not a real orange person, but orange kind of makes sense, orange and rust. Once again, your fabric, if you're looking at your color wheel, if you look at blue and then you look at the opposite side, it's orange.
I'll take your word for that.
Yeah. So if you've not done color wheels before, I use color wheels fairly often when I do a scrap quilt, because sometimes you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know. Like this quilt would have worked really well with the same color setup as the maze. So I could have, where I did the blues and the greens, I could have done that like light taupe and made it more of a monochromatic quilt. But sometimes you just want to mix it up a little bit, and then it's like, you've picked out your basic colors and you're like, what color should I use as my contrast on there? So if you don't have a color wheel, if you don't own one, like a physical wheel, go on to Google and Google color wheel. And you will have a choice of about 2 billion different color wheels. Pick one you like and print it out. And just have it as your reference for picking out your fabric. All right. So we got this. Once I added the colors, I was much happier with it. And so did the layout. This quilt and the mazed quilt is interesting in the fact that it is just 2.5-inch strips. So even the centers were 2.5s. The only place that it varies on this is that there is some border fabrics. So the rows are shifted. And so you add a border fabric up like to the top, a block up to the top, and you do the same thing on the bottom. So that way the rows shift up and down. And hey guys, by doing that, no corners to match. So no quilt tacks on this quilt. Super, super easy, fast piecing to do. So that quilt is Cathedral. And do I need to hold it up? We good?
I think we're good.
All right, fabulous. So I hope this inspires you to tame your stash. The next grouping of quilts that I'm going to do are going to be based off of 10-inch blocks. We'll see what color I choose out of my stash to start those out. So, in a month and a half, so you'll see 3 more patterns ready to get you working on taming that stash. So have a great time doing your stash, and we'll see you next time.